talk, and I don't know exactly where it was, that he was training on swordplay. And he was training with swords. And so that, of course, sparked on a couple of podcasts this idea of, is he going to be picking up a lightsaber again? And, I really don't have much of an opinion on that yet. It doesn't seem like he's force sensitive, unless he's doing more sort of melee training, like the First Order trooper did against him. I don't really see them going down the road of making him a Jedi. I could be wrong. It could be a redirect or a misdirect. I suppose we need to have multiple Jedi, right? It can't just be Rey, but they really seem like they went out of their way to establish that he wasn't force sensitive, and showing that Rey was. That I really don't know. There really isn't anything to go off of to know whether or not he would end up becoming a Jedi too. And then I can't help but wonder if that diminishes Rey's role in the film if he ends up being trained as a Jedi as well. So, but if you want to check the photos out, they're out and about on all the news sites or up on either Daisy Ridley or John Boyega's Instagram page. Also, there was a press release for a new Star Wars book, Bloodline, that's being written by Claudia Gray, who did. She did I forgot of it. Lost Stars. Sorry about that. She did Lost Stars, which covered sort of the a time period between these two individuals through the sequel trilogy and even after Return of the Jedi, leading into the Battle of Jakku. The new Claudia Gray book, Bloodline, is going to be focused on General Leia after Episode 6, before The Force Awakens, and it looks like we may be getting a little bit of background into what happened with her and Han, maybe Kylo Ren. I know people were really excited about Lost Stars, and obviously they've brought her back to do Bloodline. So this is a book that I'm actually looking forward to, just based off of the theme of families, and I would like to know more of the background of what happened with Han and Leia, and obviously Kylo Ren. So we'll see how much of that ends up being explored in this book, which doesn't come out until, and I just had a pop-up ad come up. I believe it doesn't come out until May 3rd. So if you're interested in reading any of the, not expanded universe, but any of the canon books in between the films, and you want a little bit more background, this one's coming out. All right, let's switch. Let's go ahead and switch gears here.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
I started talking about, you would have thought that I would have taken my sip of coffee while I was playing There's Been an Awakening, right? Okay, yeah. So I started getting into this last week, and then I realized that, you know what, this deserves a much, an expanded conversation, since vehicles are such a huge part of the Star Wars universe. And I just decided to, again, as I said, go through all 7 films and write down my favorite ship, honorable mention, and my least favorite, and then we'll kind of see where the conversation goes from there. And again, already looking at the clock, it's clear I'm not going to be able to get through all of these, and so maybe I'll end up adding this conversation on per movie, per podcast moving forward, and mixed in with some other topics. But let's start out with episode 1. I'm a huge fan of going back and looking at the artwork. It's amazing to see where they started and what they landed on in the actual finished product in the film. It's funny, it really isn't all that unlike when you see concept art for automobiles. It's always so shocking to see concept art for an automobile and then see the actual car itself and see how drastically different it is, and not nearly as sort of radical or as daring as the concept art was. You don't get that quite as much. They still take risks, and a lot of times you'll see artwork for the movies that's, pretty tame compared to what the end result really was. But if we just dive into my favorite vehicle from the Phantom Menace, and I had kind of a tough time with this, and it's interesting because I didn't give my 2 favorites. One got my favorite, but the other didn't get the honorable mention, and I'll explain. My favorite vehicle I think, was Darth Maul's Sith infiltrator. We didn't see it all, but just the one time, right, when it ended up landing on Tatooine. Certainly saw it in the art books. There was a toy that was out for it. It had a very TIE Fighter-esque feel to it with the rear wings, and then also kind of a cross between a TIE Fighter and a Star Destroyer with a little bit of an upcoming Jedi Starfighter into the mix. I just thought it was a very unique take on what we had seen in the original trilogy. And again, reverse engineering and moving forward, I could mentally go, oh, okay, I could see how this was kind of a larger, sort of clumsier version of what we ended up with the more tightly compacted and faster, say, TIE Fighter. And so it just, and again, the moment that it arrives on screen and you see the ball with the wings and sort of silhouette as it approaches Tatooine, it immediately brought back that, oh, TIE Fighter. And then you see it's got this big, long sort of nose on it and go, wow, that's really cool and different. I thought that vehicle was really cool. And I judge sort of the reasons why I like particular vehicles based off of, sort of how they look in flight. I'm a kid. I'll grab my X-Wing off the shelf every once in a while when nobody's looking and fly it around the room. But, when you grab a vehicle and you do that, you imagine the model builders doing the same thing, grabbing it and moving it and looking at it at different angles. And Darth Maul's Sith Infiltrator just had that kind of appeal to it. No matter what angle you looked at it at, even though it was drastically different depending on the angle, it just always looked cool. Now, the honorable mention... the one that didn't get an honorable mention that almost became my favorite was the Naboo Starfighter. I really do like the Naboo Starfighter, the yellow Starfighter with the teardrop tail on it. It was very different. Again, going back to this idea that it challenged the conventional wisdom of what we are used to in terms of vehicles. It was more like a piece of art. It had more of a craftsman-like feel to it than most of what we've seen. And certainly a departure from what we'd seen in the original trilogy, which, looked more like, car parts and things thrown together. This was a lot more visually striking, more elegant, if you will. Much like Padme's Naboo Starfighter, the big silver ship. The Naboo Starfighter's the small one, her transport one. Just had that kind of feel to it, and again, sort of bucking from traditional sort of wisdom of, oh, okay, you can have a fighter craft that looks like a piece of art, and it would have been my number one if it hadn't have been for the Sith Infiltrator. It didn't become the honorable mention because I gave the honorable mention to the Republic cruiser that you see at the very start of the film. Because that, to me, was a direct reference to the Tantive that we see at the very beginning of A New Hope, designed a little bit differently, fewer jet engines in the back, the nose was turned forward, but it certainly mirrored that. And I just love the look of those original craft. My least favorite ship probably would be the Trade Federation battle tank. But most of the Trade Federation vehicles, and maybe that was by design, most of the Trade Federation vehicles, in my view, were pretty boring. The transports that have sort of the split wing that look like kind of a biplane when you see them coming in, that bring out the battle droid transports. Yeah, those are cool. They're all okay. I don't dislike them. Most of the Trade Federation vehicles are just very boring in my opinion, and that may have been part of the aesthetic when what they were going for, just to kind of have it be more of a very form and function rather than style. All right, let's move on to episode 2. Maybe we'll actually get through the prequel trilogy today of the vehicles. I think we can actually probably pull that off. Episode 2 really stepped up the game in terms of vehicles, and as we begin to see the clone army erupt, that certainly opened up the opportunity for a lot more vehicles, and certainly vehicles and transports that look more like what we've seen, in terms of the Empire in the original trilogy. But easily, my favorite vehicle from Attack of the Clones had to be the Republic gunship. That thing is so interesting and evokes sort of a Vietnam era, Huey helicopter. And I know that some of the pieces of art and even some of the shots at the Battle of Geonosis were designed to look like that, where you've seen like the Apocalypse Now and the helicopters all coming in together in a big grassy field and the troops departing, sort of spilling out of the sides of it. Those Republic gunships were meant to sort of evoke that kind of feeling. And actually they were designed, they were a riff off of the really big, bulky, sort of Cold War Russian helicopter. And if you've seen the original Red Dawn and also the end of Stealth, the drone, artificial intelligence jet movie, which is actually pretty cool. The end of it has one of those types of big Russian helicopters as well. But I just like the way they put these big, huge, bulky wings on it. They had the ball gunners on the side, and I just thought they looked cool. I mean, one of my favorite battle moments in all of the movies comes at the very end of Attack of the Clones of the war in the Geonosian arena. Padme goes, "Look up," and all those gunships come descending down upon the arena. That moment in the film to the end is just amazing to me. I love the end of Attack of the Clones. That whole battle sequence is just absolutely fantastic. My only complaint on that is it all looks too CGI because they painted the sky orange, and I've talked about this in a previous podcast, but I know it's supposed to be a different environment, and therefore the sky on Geonosis is orange. I get that. However, it really sort of paints a weird sheen over all of it that doesn't give it a real feel. I would have rather have had it be more like a. Well, you know what? To be honest with you, look at The Martian. The Martian is probably a better example of what I would have liked Geonosis to have looked like in terms of, what the planet surface looked like. Now, you look at how far back that was and how still sort of in our infancy we were in terms of CGI technology, and they did a pretty darn good job. But that's my only complaint at the end of that movie. Honorable mention goes to the Jedi Starfighter. I love the Jedi Starfighter. It's a little sort of plain Jane, riffing off of a Star Destroyer, the Wedge sort of look on it. But I just thought, again, it was a very cool-looking vehicle, which, in my opinion, as it relates to who's using it, Jedis, and, that sort of isn't exactly the kind of thing that most Jedis do. That wasn't exactly, you weren't going to have a lot of vehicles for Jedi because they were supposed to be peacekeepers, right? So, how do you design a vehicle that a Jedi can use but still has that sort of Jedi-esque feel to it, and you end up with a Jedi Starfighter. Least favorite vehicle, what did I write down? Oh, the ATTE, the early version of the Walkers, the ATTE. I just they didn't really do it for me. Having the 6 legs, the bulkiness of it, when you compare it to when you look at the evolution of the Walkers in the films. And I wish we had seen more of the walkers that they built for Episode 7. But when you look at that evolution, the ATTE is a good starting point. And it does have that sort of old school, like if you had a 40s truck, a 1940s, pickup truck, compared to a 2016 pickup truck. Oh, okay. You can kind of see how we got there and the difference between it. It just didn't ever do a whole lot for me. And again, going back to the Trade Federation, the spider droid, didn't seem very practical. That seemed kind of weird. But again, these are vehicles and ships that aren't necessarily supposed to look cool to a certain extent, right? They're more there for a sense of purpose. So that would have to be probably my least favorite one. All right, let's go ahead and we'll do Revenge of the Sith. and then we'll cover vehicles on next week.